Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be joining you today. Good morning to all of you. I very much regret that I can't be with you in person this time. I think this is really the first time in more than a decade that I've not been able to join DSDS in person. I was called back to the United Nations actually on exactly the questions, Dr. Ghosh, that you so eloquently opened our session. And maybe I will start there to say a few words about the deliberations taking place in New York and, of course, the context then for Asia. What makes this year and next year so crucially important for the next 20 years for the planet is that the world's governments are trying very hard to finalize a new set of arrangements in two interrelated spheres. On the one hand, the Millennium Development Goals will reach their conclusion next year. And under a mandate that was agreed at the Rio Plus 20 summit in June 2012, the world's governments are negotiating now a new set of development goals, provisionally called, of course, Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, that will take effect at the beginning of 2016 and will presumably cover the period from 2016 to 2030. And these new SDGs, to follow the MDGs, will do exactly what the chairman just so well described, and that is to lay a groundwork in which development can proceed, especially for the world's poorest countries, but in fact for all countries, but within planetary boundaries. And there is an open working group now of the member states of the UN, which is trying to finalize a list of recommendations for what those sustainable development goals should be. The second interconnected process, of course, is the negotiation on climate change, which has proven to be a terribly elusive, difficult process for the last 22 years since the Framework Convention on Climate Change was negotiated at the Earth Summit in 1992. And as everybody knows, the underlying human driver of climate change, the rise of greenhouse gases, has not been brought under control. It continues to increase and indeed accelerate to the point where the current trajectory for the planet is for a warming not of the 2 degrees centigrade limit that the world has agreed, but for nearly 4 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. Virtually every scientist agrees that if the planet were to warm by 4 degrees centigrade, the effects would be calamitous. Calamitous around the world in rising sea levels, in massive storms, heat waves, droughts, floods, loss of biodiversity, and profound threats to food security and to human health. So we have two negotiating processes underway now. The SDGs to reach their conclusion in September 2015, and the new climate agreement, which aims for a new protocol to be agreed in Paris in the so-called COP21, the 21st meeting of the Conference of the Parties, which will be in December 2015. It's a very difficult process on both scores. The stakes are extraordinarily high. As the panel will discuss, the stakes in South Asia are especially high. There is still a great deal of poverty and, of course, a great deal of development ahead. At the same time, the threats to the planetary boundaries are already evident. South Asia is highly vulnerable to climate change. It's a region already facing massive threats of floods and droughts, a massive extent of thermal stress on crops, depletion of groundwater, vulnerability to rising sea levels, vulnerability to increased storm surges, depletion of vital biodiversity. And so the stakes really could not be higher. It's going to be not only complex to reach agreements, but very complex, of course, to achieve results. All of the evidence suggests that the remaining carbon budget, for example, within which we can safely, relatively safely use fossil fuels, is almost depleted. Today, in 2014, we will emit around 35 billion tons of carbon dioxide from our fossil fuel use. But given the extreme danger of breaching the 2 degrees centigrade threshold, by mid-century, we're going to need to be emitting less than half of today's level, but in a context of a world economy which is 3 times larger. And so in this sense, we're going to need a very deep transformation to a low carbon economy, and that will have to take place in all parts of the world. For India, this will mean, of course, massive deployment of renewable energy resources, solar, wind power, geothermal energy, hydropower, and also potentially a large-scale deployment of carbon capture and sequestration. Our technologies for heating and cooling buildings, for transport, for industrial processes will need deep transformation and in a relatively short period of time. So this is the challenge ahead of us, and the negotiating challenge is a very short-term challenge. The challenge of actually meeting the goals that we will set will be at least a 1 generation long challenge. Indeed, to really decarbonize the global energy system will take us to mid-century. I want to conclude these brief comments by mentioning a specific initiative which I'm honored to direct on behalf of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And this is the new Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is a worldwide effort to help link and mobilize the universities of the world, the great think tanks like TERI, and great development institutions like Brock, to help bring practical, timely solutions to the areas of sustainable energy, sustainable water, sustainable food supplies, resilient cities. So I'm very, very happy that TERI and Brock together will help to co-host and co-organize the South Asian Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And at this meeting of DSDS, that network is being formed, and I'll be coming myself in the spring. I'm looking forward, of course, to being in Delhi soon to help launch the new South Asia network. So it's a pleasure for me to mention this today and to thank Dr. Pachauri and to thank all the colleagues at TERI and at Brock and at universities and think tanks around South Asia to join together in many of the ongoing excellent networks, and I hope new ones that we can help to spur so that the difficult challenges that the panel will now take on can be addressed systematically and with a considerable amount of expertise and public participation in the years ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me make these remarks. It's a little bit late here, as you know. You can also hear that I'm losing my voice after a long day of speaking, both at the university and at the United Nations. But I'm happy to still have a little voice left, and I'd be happy to answer a question or two if there is one. Thank you very, very much.